The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We have a special Volpe report this week. We have two political consultants who are among the top of their profession in the country. I am fortunate to have had personal relationships with both of them, and I'm sure you will agree when you hear their resumes, which speak for themselves, that they are among the best at what they do. Most of this election season, we have brought you candidates and guests to comment on what's been called a historic election for this country's future. And as always, while I'm very candid in expressing my personal views, we will always bring you different points of view that are responsible and intellectually based. Which brings us to our first guest, Chris Durlak, a partner at Purple Strategies, a national firm based in Washington, D.C. Purple Strategies is one of the top political consulting firms in the country, as well as one of the top private sector corporate consulting firms as well. Chris was a graduate of George Mason University and began his career as a political media consultant at McMahon & Squire, a national firm that consulted the Democratic Party on presidential elections, governor's races, U.S. Senate races, as well as congressional and state assembly races. Eventually, McMahon & Squire merged with other companies to form Purple Strategies. Chris consulted on campaign ads for the National Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the National Democratic Senate Campaign Committee, as well as the Indiana State Democratic Party, the Virginia Senate Democratic Caucus, as well as numerous congressional and state races in Texas, Indiana, Iowa, and Virginia. In addition to his political work, Chris is a veteran corporate media strategist, advising business and communication leaders at companies in both the United States and globally across categories that include energy, consumer goods, healthcare, financial services, and defense. His biggest accomplishment was accepting a leading role in crafting public messaging for British Petroleum after their catastrophic oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico years ago. Chris's guidance was pivotal in restoring trust and acceptance of responsibility by that energy giant. Chris also serves on the Board of Trustees of George Mason University Foundation and does pro bono work with the Washington, D.C. Dream Center. Our second guest you know a lot better because he's more familiar and is on the show more, and that is Vince Galko, Senior Vice President of Mercury Public Affairs. Vince brings over 15 years of experience and is recognized as one of Pennsylvania's top Republican political strategists. Vince was the regional administrator for the United States Department of Education and was a senior advisor to United States Senator Pat Toomey, senior advisor to Congressman Pat Meehan and Lou Barletta, former campaign manager for United States Senator Rick Santorum, former deputy director of President George W. Bush's re-election campaign in Pennsylvania in 2004, and was the former executive director of the Republican Party in Pennsylvania in 2005. Vince received his degree from St. Joseph's University in International Relations and Economics. We look forward to their debate on this show, discussing the issues that will form the opinions of voters for the November 8th election in 2 days.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Thank you both for coming. This show airs this Sunday, which is exactly 2 days before what I believe will be one of the most historic elections in my lifetime. In the sense that, and I know there'll be those out there that say, well, that's kind of hyperbole, Chuck. We have these things every 2 years. I disagree. Right now, we have an economy that's as bad as it's been in 40 or 50 years. Interest rates are going to go up another 75 basis points. I just saw that the 30-year mortgage is up finally over 7%. It was under 3 about a year and a half ago. Inflation appears to be unchecked. People are going to have a tough time paying for their heating oil this winter to heat their homes and put gas in their car. And also, grocery bills are up between 16 and 20%. So I actually quoted a gentleman I know both of you will have heard of. His name was Bill Blaine, and he does a piece from London. He's a London economist called Blaine's Morning Porridge, where he predicted in Europe a year ago that the European continent effectively was going to have to make a choice. Their people heat or eat. And we're almost at that point in the United States. So I'm going to throw it to you, Chris, first. Your assessment of the landscape as it sits for Democrats as they head into this election, which is upon us.
Yeah, look, it's always a tough landscape when you're the party in power, when you control all three branches of government. I mean, typically, when you're the incumbent president's party, you're going to take some losses. Those losses can vary, but it's always going to be an uphill stream. I'm confident of what Democrats are going to do this election cycle because of what Joe Biden really has accomplished, and I think it's really hard to find a more successful 2-year period from any president than what Joe Biden's done. Infrastructure, bipartisan infrastructure, something that Trump talked about, couldn't get done. Joe Biden got it done. The most impactful climate change legislation we've seen in this country, the biggest investment in that's going to get us off long-term, transition us from fossil fuels. Something, others have talked about, Joe Biden got it done. Even things, issues like decriminalizing of marijuana, getting nonviolent offenders out of prison. These are all things that people like President Trump talked about, and Joe Biden actually got Democrats and Republicans working together to get it done. So yes, there's a tough economic outlook. I noticed, Chuck, in your setup, you forgot to mention unemployment's at its lowest it's ever been. We have very high employment right now. So I think that's important. I think people look at that as well. But there, no doubt, people are struggling. But I think we're coming out of a global pandemic, something we haven't faced before. We're still seeing the lingering impacts from the supply chain being disrupted, like it's never in our lifetime been disrupted before. And then also we have things, a lot out of our control, things like in Ukraine, which are also wreaking havoc on oil and gas and those sorts of things. So I think we're on the right path. I think there's a lot of close races in the House and the Senate, including right there in my home state of Pennsylvania. I think that'll be the closest Senate race in the country, but I think there's a lot that Democrats have to run on.
Right. I would be a lot more concerned for the Republican win in that I expect in a couple days if you were running the campaign. And I'm not blowing smoke. You're the first Democratic guest I've had that talked about issues in substance that way, as I said, and you managed to do it without mentioning abortion and mentioning some of the other things and mentioning Trump, for example. So having said that, Vince, your response.
Sure. Well, thanks, Chuck. Chris, great to be with you again. As Chris mentioned, I think it's a midterm election. So whenever you have a midterm, the deck is stacked against the party in the White House. Only twice in our country has the party in the White House picked up seats in the midterm, the last being 2002 with George W. Bush. So the deck was kind of stacked against Democrats heading into this year. However, the economic crisis, the rise of crime on our streets, empty store shelves, and certainly a lot of uneasiness overseas has only grown the dissatisfaction with the Democratic leadership in this country. So I do think it's going to be an historic year for Republicans. And I'll divide that by saying I think nationally, Republicans are going to have a great year. They're going to pick up seats. I would expect the House to go past 230 for Republicans. The Senate is going to be tighter. We could get a 2 or 3 vote margin in the Senate. There's really 4 seats to look at there: Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and I'm missing another one. Nevada's the other one. So, and only in one of those seats, I believe, in Arizona, is the incumbent Democrat above 50%. The other 3 seats, the incumbent Democrat is below 50%. So great pickup opportunities in the Senate. So it's looking more and more likely that there'll be a Republican control of certainly the House and a very good chance in the Senate as well going forward. In Pennsylvania, it's a different story. Pennsylvania is a state that's been trending much more Democrat in recent years. We sneak in some statewide wins every now and then, and our congressional delegation is now at 50-50 thanks to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's overreach, but that's for a different day. So I think there's, certainly in Pennsylvania, we have a pickup opportunities of several seats. I think they're counting on at least 2 seats here in Pennsylvania to switch. The Cartwright-Bognett race and the Schiller-Wild race, Republicans are both favored, I think, going into both those races at this point. Right. You have 2 seats out in the West, Mike Doyle, the Republican, running against Summer Lee, Schaefer running, and then in the Southeast, a little tougher territory down there, Philly suburbs, but they're looking at PA 6th with Guy Shiraki versus Chrissy Houlihan as a good pickup opportunity as well. So I think if Republicans can come out of Pennsylvania with the 2-seat gain, that's well on their way to gaining 30-plus seats in the House and put them at that 230 mark.
Right. Like rebuttal, Chris, from what you've heard, like your take?
Well, I'm not too far off from the prediction. I do think on the Senate, I do think Democrats are going to hold the Senate. I think they're going to hold it narrowly by 1 or 2 seats. I always feel good about what Democrats can do in Nevada. If you remember, Republicans said Harry Reid was dead. Every poll showed him down 5, 6, 7 points, and then he ended up winning by 5, 6, 7 points.
Right.
The Democratic Party in Nevada knows how to win elections, maybe more than any other state party. So I'm always feeling good about there. In Georgia, I feel like Warnock is going to pull it out. I think he's a great candidate. I don't think Herschel Walker has done himself any favors with the news that continues to come out about him, and I don't think he did a particularly good job. The campaign did a great job of lowering expectations in that debate for him, But even with that, I really think Warnock's going to hold, and I do think the Fetterman-Oz race is going to be the closest race, U.S. Senate race in the entire country. I think that is going to just like it was in the presidential in 2020. It's going to come down to a few thousand votes, maybe 10,000 votes either way.
I have to ask you this. I know I mentioned it off air. There's been editorials all over the country on John Fetterman's performance in the public debate. Obviously, he was addled by after effects of his serious, he had a massive stroke. And of course, the editorials, depending whether they're from more writers or left, the right seems to think it could be decisive in what was already a very close race for Oz. The left writers, political pundits say, well, I think people will look past and understand, and doctors have said that, one, his campaign screwed up royally. They should never have allowed him to be in that kind of a debate so soon after a stroke. Bad decision, which I think the campaign has acknowledged. Secondly, they said, if doctors have said, that's to be expected. He would have those difficulties recovering, but it won't in any way impact his ability to serve in the U.S. Senate. So your take on what happened, clearly it's an issue because the whole country's been talking about it for a week. But go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, the Fetterman-Oz race has been going on for over a year. I mean, with both those candidates campaigning, I think people have a good sense of who they are. I think most people know someone who's gone through a stroke in their family or friends and know what it takes to recover from that. And I think have a lot of empathy for John going through that debate. I do think there's precedent here too. I mean, Senator Mark Kirk from Illinois has had a stroke. Republicans didn't stop supporting them, so I'm sure they'll give the lieutenant governor the same benefit they gave a member of their own party, Mark Kirk, when he went through something similar during his U.S. Senate race.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, certainly when the lieutenant governor had his stroke and the time afterwards, I think all Pennsylvanians, regardless of party, wished him well, and certainly still continue to wish him well and pray for his speedy recovery. A couple of things in the debate. Number one, I think often we get too wrapped up in these debates as to who really watches them. Unfortunately, a large number of Pennsylvanians already voted by the time that debate took place. Oftentimes, people who watch debates are partisans anyway. They already know who they're voting for. They just watch it because they like politics. So I think the overall debate itself, who watches that evening, is going to have a little effect. The articles and coverage after the debate will have much more of an effect, I think, than the actual debate itself. And I'm less concerned about the lieutenant governor's cognitive abilities. I think what two takeaways for me was his inability to give a firm answer on two very important issues. One was fracking. He was before it, before he was against it, before he was for it, and now in the days afterwards he's against it again. And the other issue was abortion, which is a very divisive issue in this country. But he would not even admit to restrictions of any kind, which I think upwards of 80% of Americans agree that there needs to be restrictions at some point.
Right.
He couldn't even agree that. So I think those were the two issues that, if there were undecided voters watching that race, aside from his overall performance, those two key issues where he could not give a clear answer or was certainly duplicative on them caused him a lot of harm.
Chris, your comment on that?
Look, I think that it was definitely a rough debate for the lieutenant governor. I think Dr. Oz's problem is that people see him as a phony. They see him as a carpetbagger from New Jersey who just came here to throw. He's put over $20 million of his own money into the Senate race. And he really hasn't connected with Pennsylvanians through this, and you see that multiple times through the campaign of him really just pretending to be a Pennsylvanian. And I don't think there's anyone more to the heart of Pennsylvania and who Pennsylvanians are than John Fetterman, who was a small town mayor. Who cared about his community, who got into politics for the right reasons. And when you look at the two side by side, I think it's easy to see which one's going to fight more for Pennsylvania, which one is more connected to what Pennsylvanians care about.
Understood. Okay, Vince, I'm going to start with you on this question, and then we'll reverse the order a little bit. Is quoting a famous and respected Democratic strategist, James Carville. He has been very, to my mind, having read a lot of what he talks about, what's printed, that is, has been critical of his party. And it started about a year or so ago, maybe even 2 years, with wokeness. He basically was warning the Democrats to steer away from what he called, and I'll quote him exactly, faculty lounge rhetoric. He made references to some of it, and he gave examples, when he talked about, like, for example, communities of color. And he said, people don't talk that way. He said, they used to be neighborhoods. They're still neighborhoods, things like that. More recently, he has been critical of, as I mentioned already to Chris, about this campaign cycle and these races, talking about every other word Democrat candidates say is either Trump or abortion. And right now, they don't make the top 5 issues. All polling I've seen, they don't make the top 5 of what people care about. Right. They care about the economy, stupid. A famous James Carville quote, it's the economy, stupid. They care about interest, feeding their family, paying for their heating bill this winter. They care about crime, which is at record highs. They care about the crisis at the border, which the Biden administration has done very little to articulate a policy on. Your take on some of those issues and the messaging for Republicans, they appear to be hitting the bullseye, in my view, in terms of what the commercials I see. They're on the economy, they're on crime, they're on immigration. But go ahead. Sure.
I mean, this has been an interesting election cycle, because if you go back to March and April, you would say Republicans may have their greatest year ever in an election. And certainly over the summer months, Democrats kind of leveled out a little bit. The abortion decision came down. Democrats were very effective on rallying their troops with those numbers. But now with the economy again taking a turn for the worse, Putin threatening to use nuclear weapons overseas, and everything else in between, we're going back to that April level of dissatisfaction with the government. A lot of things motivate voters. Fear is one of them. It's one of the highest motivations. And the Democrats have always done a better job of scaring voters than Republicans have. Whether it be we're going to privatize Social Security, which has been a myth. Whether it's, we need to shut down your schools and keep your kids at home during COVID. And now it's, we're going to take away a women's right to choose all over, no matter what, all over the country. The thing is, I think voters are smarter than that. And that's often why Republicans win, because they see through that. Abortion isn't illegal anywhere in this country right now. And the Dobbs decision, all it did was outlaw abortion after 15 weeks, which I think the vast majority of Americans already agree with.
Almost 70%.
But Democrats have done a good job of and right, it's their job to do so, convince Americans that this is the end of a women's right to choose. What it did is gave the choice back to the states, have more voices, let it be decided at the state level. That's probably a debate for another day as well. But I think that what the Republican advantage has been is that people know that when they go to pump gas, they know the price. When they go to the grocery store, they know if they can find the grocery they need, number one. Number two, they're paying 10, 20% more than they usually do for that. When the issues that really matter to people, the Democrats are losing on those key issues. And not only that, but in a lot of cases, you have Democrat incumbents who are much better financed than their Republican challengers are. But the Republicans are either neck and neck or winning those races, which is usually not the case. The better funded candidate usually wins. But in this case, Republicans have had the ability to get their message out, not on their own, but just through the economy itself, right? They a voter may go home and watch a Democratic ad 5 times, but as soon as they go to the gas pumps, that's good enough for the Republican. That's their ad, right? So that really helps the cause for the party not in power.
Right. Chris, a lot to chew on, but
yeah. I'll start where Vince and I agree. We agree on the intelligence of the voter. I think the voters are smart. I agree. I think they're also smart, and they see that Republicans don't have a plan to deal with any of this, and that the only plan that Republicans have put out is the chairman of the Republican Senatorial Committee, Rick Scott, put out his plan, and his plan talks about over 5 years ending Social Security, ending Medicare, having to re-vote on those things, and would put both of those programs, Social Security and Medicare, at risk. That's the one Republican plan by a leader of the party that's been put out there, and I take them at their word that those are the things they're going to look to do if they take control of the government. And so that's what we know. And I think voters can see that Republicans don't have a plan to deal with any of this. Meanwhile, President Biden's been doing a lot. He's passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which actually is reducing the deficit. Again, something that Trump and Republicans talked about couldn't do. President Biden got it done. So I think you can compare and you can see what Democrats are for. We don't, other than the Rick Scott plan, and I urge your viewers to go Google it, read the Rick Scott plan, and decide if that's what you want in the next Republican Congress.
Right.
Sure. Well, I agree with Chris. President Biden has been doing a lot, which is why we're in the mess that we're in today. I think that Republicans certainly have a plan, and there's many reasons why inflation is here today. Certainly, problems with the supply chain relating to COVID is one of them. You can address that by certainly making more products here at home or becoming less dependent on China and other adversaries for what we need here at home. The other big thing is government spending, right? The number one cause of inflation overall is government spending. And the Inflation Reduction Act, although a nice title, did very little to reduce inflation, if nothing. In fact, most experts agreed that it actually increased inflation. You have increased government spending over and over again, more federal dollars on the streets only leads to higher costs of goods. And finally, the third driver of inflation is energy. And I don't think anyone will argue that the Democratic Party is very much against domestic production of energy resources in this country, which is driving up the cost of production, driving up the cost of everything from people going to work, people getting their products, trucks and trains and ships trying to deliver their products. That all contributes to the cost. We have energy here in this country to produce. We shouldn't be held hostage. President Biden, shouldn't have to go beg the OPEC leaders for more oil, and then a month later they laugh at him and cut production anyway. So we have to do more at home. The Republicans clearly have a plan to deal with all of that, and we'll see what happens after November 8th if they can get some of it done.
Right. Chris, final comment on that subject?
Yeah, I mean, I think Vince makes a great point on trying to get more manufacturing done here in America. And President Biden passed the CHIPS Act, which does exactly that, which gets semiconductors and other technology manufactured here rather than China. That was another bipartisan achievement of the president. So I agree that Democrats don't often do a good job of talking about what they've accomplished. And I think on a lot of these issues, while not perfect, while not everything, and we have a long way to go. Certainly people are struggling and we got to do more to help them. I think voters need to decide which party do they want helping them. Is it the party that doesn't have a plan, that floats ideas about cutting Social Security and Medicare, or is it looking at President Biden's record of accomplishments and deciding if that's who they want in their corner? So I think that's what voters are going to decide, and especially in Northeast Pennsylvania.
At stake in Pennsylvania, we have, as all states do, issues that play on people's minds, voters' minds, that are somewhat unique to their state. We all want cleaner energy. We all understand that climate change is real. There's arguments to the degree at which it's moving along and when the catastrophe is coming. I don't subscribe to the apocalypse is around the corner either. But having said that, you can't shut off all fossil fuel drilling, cancel all leases on federal land, stop Marcellus shale drilling, disincentivizing banks for fossil fuel investments. And what he basically called on, this again is Thomas Friedman in that editorial, was for the president to give a speech walking back some of the administration's positions and telling Americans, we still need fossil fuels. We definitely need natural gas. Make us more energy independent as we were. So first, Chris, your thoughts on Friedman's comments and where you stand on that, and you think the Democratic Party needs to be?
Well, look, I think the Democratic Party is for an all of the above solution, I think, but you have to do it responsibly. I think there's a lot of people around the country in Pennsylvania and other states too have seen when you don't regulate the oil and gas production, what can happen in communities in terms of the environmental impact And so I think you have to balance both, and you have to you can't make these decisions one way or the other. But I do think, the president passed the largest investment in climate, and a lot of that money, is going towards that transition and it's a transition. It's not a let's stop fossil fuels, right? It's investing in the technologies that we're going to need by 2030 and beyond in order to have a sustainable supply of energy. And you see a lot of the major oil companies too in support of this and transitioning their businesses away from fossil fuels to clean energy. So it's not just the government; it's happened in the private sector as well. And I think with what the president's done, the government's been there to support that transition, because it's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy, but something we have to do as a country.
Right. Vince.
Certainly, I think the Biden administration's domestic oil and energy production can be summed up in just in the last few days, where he is encouraging and actually insisting that oil companies open more refineries, start refining more oil here in America, and then he announces, but if you do it successfully, we're going to increase taxes on you. So, it's one hand he's telling me to do something, and then he's discouraging me to do it at the same time with this latest tax he wants to put on the oil and gas companies. You raised a great point as far as emboldening in Russia and the fact that Putin holds the cards for a lot of these Western European countries, dating back to mistakes that Merkel made in negotiations with him. But I really think the root of this cause, and really the root of the downfall of the Democrats this election cycle, started when Joe Biden surrendered to the Taliban in Afghanistan. Americans watched in horror as our allies, our troops, even members of our military, lost their lives in the final days of that disaster. At that moment, our enemies, Russia, China, and others, saw the resolve of the Biden administration and realized we can do whatever we want because they're incompetent and they're not going to stop us. And then the green light went to go to Ukraine. China stepped up its rhetoric on Taiwan, which leads to things like the CHIPS Act, because now we're being held hostage by China because they may seize Taiwan at some point, which the world gets the majority of their chips from. So I think the lack of, when America shows strength, the world is a safer place. And internationally, we've shown at the very best indecision, at the very worst incompetence over the last several years, which has led to many of these crises, including crises related to energy.
Okay. I have to give you the last word. We're down to 1 minute, Chris. You have the final say to respond.
Sure. Well, look, I think one of Joe Biden's greatest achievements was ending the war in Afghanistan. That was one of America's longest wars. We spent billions and billions of dollars that we don't have. And it was something that President Trump said he would get done, and once again couldn't get done. So President Biden came in and did it, and we got it done, and we got the U.S. out of Afghanistan. And so I think it's a big accomplishment. I will say just my last prediction as you wrap up, Chuck, Phillies in 6. And another will air on Sunday, so it'll all be true. And Tyrese Maxey on the Philadelphia 76ers will be an NBA All-Star. Those are my last two predictions.
Chris and Vince, thank you so much. Let me tell you what, if all the debates were this informative and collegial and friendly, all those scoring points, our country would be a lot better place. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks, Vince.
My name is Lieutenant Colonel Joe Albert, U.S. Army retired, and commander of Scranton's Cope Conley American Legion Post 121. And we want to invite all of you in the Wolf TV viewing area to join us in celebrating Veterans Day this Friday, November 11th at 11 a.m. at the Veterans Plaza of the Lackawanna County Courthouse, Washington Avenue in Scranton, where we will again be presenting our annual Veterans Day program, honoring the men and women of the area who served our country. We are honored to have, for this year's program, again, the University of Scranton ROTC cadets, as well as the Northeastern Detachment Marine Corps League Honor Guard, and of course music by Scranton's own Paulette Costa. Our key speaker this year will be an ex-Marine, who is the Scranton Police Chief, Tom Carroll. We would of course like to thank Chuck Volpe, as well as the staff and technicians here at Wolf TV for giving us this time. Remember, Friday, November 11th, 11 a.m., Veterans Day in Scranton. Come out and help honor those who served our country. Have a nice day, and God bless America.